black holes or whatever. How does that affect us humans? And question number 2, if intelligence or consciousness can be described as intelligent energy, and since, as you said, energy cannot be created or destroyed, you don't need a God to create our minds because it exists always, and we don't die, as you said, when the body dies, but you also, like I said, don't need a God to create us in the first place.
Yes. So on your first question about E.T., I think that E.T. would be no different than you looking up at the sky. And so, again, when any extraterrestrial intelligence or human or an animal observes something, that reality is collapsed. And together with that, all the spatial temporal logic, and that also includes the individuals who may have been part of that past. So it doesn't mean that they will necessarily change your timeline, because, again, space and time are relative to each individual observer. So that E.T. may collapse something, and indeed that reality becomes real to E.T. Your reality is real to you, and the mistake we often make is that this intersubjective objectivity that we think of in our science books doesn't really work that way. So again, observer dependent reality, it begins and ends with each individual observer. And as far as consciousness, you're absolutely right. You don't need a God to collapse that. You're living proof of that. I mean, the fact that your consciousness exists is an information system that exists in its own right. It's just the nature of the creature, and where we stumble into problems is that when we say there's something in nothingness, and they're just simply not understanding the complete circle.
Thanks, Bill. Wildcard 2, Jim in the truck. Jim, I hope we're making your drive a little more interesting tonight.
Yeah, I don't need these two. There you go. Up here in Toronto, and I'm out of New Bedford, Mass, and I listen to you guys all the time, call in all the time, too. Yeah, I just want to say, I'm a Christian, and I don't believe what this guy Robert's saying, and agree to disagree with him, but the Bible says that it's appointed that the man wants to die and then the judgment. So you could go to one of two places, and the way I believe that is that I know that I'm just a creature, and I'm not the creator. I know that the job's taken. So I understand God's real by the prophecies that are coming to pass today. But what do you basically believe, Robert? You believe that there's reincarnation? Is that what you believe?
Well, what you need to understand is whether it's science or religion, we're very primitive creatures. We're like chipmunks and squirrels. We can only comprehend the universe to a certain degree. So your religious beliefs that you have about judgment and being punished or not being punished, there's an element of truth as much as we're able to grasp. Likewise, there are elements of science that are correct. And again, we can talk about the Eastern philosophies about reincarnation. So again, we're very primitive creatures, and there are elements of truth depending on how you define your terms and how it's framed. So I'm not going to dismiss your belief system, because indeed much of what you believe, there's probably very real evidence that would suggest that there's truth to it. But it doesn't mean that there isn't truth to other ways of thinking as well.
They're not mutually exclusive.
Exactly.
Okay. Thanks for the call out there, Jim in the truck. Be careful out there on the roads. Bill in Florida, you're on the line with Dr. Robert Lanza.
Hi, guys. My question is, I happen to I happen to know for a fact that I've changed some parts of some parts of physical reality. I've done it many times, actually. It's not like I can levitate, don't get me wrong, but I have changed reality. Can you explain that? Can you explain how I've done that?
Well, the problem, unfortunately, is as much as my ideas may stretch your way of thinking, in the end, I was trained the old-fashioned way as a scientist, and so the cause and effect seems to, always play out in the world that I've experienced. So I'm not really sure how you're saying you're changing reality. Yes, indeed, there are ways that you might interpret that, but I'm not sure of the specific episode you're talking about, so I can't really try to give you an explanation.
Bill, if you're still on the line there, can you tell us how you changed it?
Okay. I'll give you an example. I've taken a paper towel and turned it into a real towel. How did I do that?
That's a good question. If you can do that, I know some people that may want to hire you to sell your product. No, honestly, I don't have an explanation
I can't do
for
it
that.
all the time. I cannot do it all the time. I cannot do it at will. But I have exactly done things like that at least 20, 30, 40 times in my life. And I've never figured out how that's possible. But I'm thinking to myself that maybe when you're talking about molecules and you're talking about everything else, that there's a way to do that. And like I said, I've never figured out how I did it. I've never figured out, it's not like it was an illusion. It's not like it was a hallucination. I've actually done it.
Okay. Well, I take your word for it. I just know as a scientist I haven't encountered that kind of a phenomenon. I'm not saying that it's not possible, just that it's not something that I personally could explain to you.
But, Bill, you'd have a heck of a future here if you had that talent and you could move here to Las Vegas. They'd probably bar you from the casinos, though. Thanks for the call. On the international line, Dave. Hi, Dave. How you doing? What's on your mind?
Hey, pretty good, thanks. I'd just like to say with programs like this, it's Coast to Coast is the beacon in the dark night. I'm telling you, guys are great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the religious vein about Romans 12:2 says that God has a good, acceptable, and perfect will, which means there's like three wills, which would kind of make you think you have more than one reality if he has a good, acceptable, and perfect will. If anybody wants to look that one up. But what I wanted to mention was an incident that happened to me. I had a near-death experience where I almost died, yet my mother and twin sister had a premonition that night that they were going to get a call the next day that I did die, yet obviously I didn't. And just the last question I was going to say, the question is that if we can have a perfect existence or reality, how can we get that ideal reality? And if I'm in my ideal reality now, are you guys just bit players in it, or are you guys in your ideal reality as well as me?
Hey, this is my movie.
I think a lot of, what you're speaking of, more has to do with meaning, and choosing the things that are important to you. And, and that's really an individual thing as to what each person considers to be of most value in their life.
He mentioned near-death experiences, premonitions. A topic we've talked about a lot on this program, ESP, all these things, time slips, things like that. Are there these aberrations where these different realities intercede on our own, do you think?
Yeah, I think that there's no question that you can, have distortions of space and time, and, any sort of person who may have taken LSD or something, would know, or even if you had some alcohol, that you had a distorted sense of reality, that clearly there are ways of perceiving what's going on different than the way we're perceiving them today. But what I can also say is that, through evolutionary biology, that animals probably sense things, and, the more primitive ones in one dimension, and then a little higher 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions. So that, how we experience space and time and what's going on, there'd be a lot of very interesting turns and twists, and I think, the physicists can attest to, they talk about one-dimensional cracks in space. I'm not sure I agree with all of this, but there's a lot out there, with the string theory, and, some of these theories actually envision, 6 dimensions curled up at every point in space like soda straws. Again, these are mathematical theories, and how they translate into our everyday world, you'd have to ask them, but, my guess is that they're only under very extreme conditions.
Okay, east of the Rockies, Dave in Kentucky. Hi, Dave.
Evening, gentlemen. Good to talk to you.
Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, couple of quick comments. First of all, with the reality being based on the perception of the observer, wouldn't that kind of mean that all religions are true?
Well, when I mean observer determined, I'm not really meaning, that you actually create the reality you want. What we mean is that the actual properties of particles are dependent on the observer, so that if the observer makes this or that decision, it will impact those particular properties. Again, whether you're discerning the location or the momentum of a particle. What it doesn't mean is that you can go out there and just make whatever reality you want, because there still are the laws of causality and the interactions that you and I know occur in our everyday life.
Okay. Understand. There was a comment you made earlier about how, if gravity was just a tiny bit different,
yes,
it would change the properties of the universe and there would be no us.
Right.
And such. I've always thought that was kind of a backwards way of looking at it. Not so much that the universe is developed perfectly for us, but that we adapted perfectly to the universe as it existed.
Well, what we're saying by these constants, and you mentioned gravity, is that there wouldn't be a universe for us to adapt to. In other words, if the gravitational constant was ever so slight, there wouldn't have been stars, there wouldn't have been all the things that we know in the universe. And then you can look at, again, one after the other parameter, one after the other law, all four of the forces of nature, and what you find is that they're just simply the probability that there would even be a universe is so infinitesimally tiny, if you said it was random, that there would be nothing for us to evolve to. So this is why, there's a concern. John Wheeler had what's called an anthropic principle, which is saying the observer participates in that reality. But this is why people were saying, there's a God, that this is intelligent design, because our current scientific model doesn't explain those. And yes, I know where you're coming from when you say, well, okay, we, just evolved to these things. But we're talking about the actual laws of the universe that could be any value, and yet they're precisely this or that at every step of the way. And so the question is that is almost statistically an impossibility to have occurred.
Dave, thank you. Those were good observations. West of the Rockies, Luis in San Diego. Hi, Luis.
Hi, how are you doing tonight?
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if this was the right kind of concept, but as far as time is concerned, I was thinking not to the left or the right, or kind of time is above us, and like say going back in time or going in the future, is it being able to get into that place that that time is, so you could go back in time or go in the future in time, but we don't have enough knowledge to do it right now. Because fascinated by the whole thing of time travel.
Yeah, I think, again, you're touching on an interesting topic, and that is that space and time indeed are algorithms in our mind. And once we understand consciousness and how we put this whole thing together in our minds, that's where neurophysiology will come into play. We'll eventually understand how to make those information systems work, for artificial intelligence. And once we do that, we can tamper with those algorithms, perhaps, so that you could almost think about time in an extra dimension where you could actually walk through time, very much like you walk through space. So again, as I mentioned, through evolutionary biology, there are probably animals that experience reality in one dimension, two dimension. We experience it in three. And my guess is should we gain knowledge in, the coming millennia, we probably will know how to manipulate those algorithms so we can do exactly that.
Thanks, Luis. Appreciate it. First-time caller Jacob in New Mexico. Hi, Jacob. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, I'm a big fan, by the way. Two questions. As far as time and stuff like that, like you said, it doesn't exist or whatever, but innuendos, premonitions, deja vu, does it all relate to, like, meeting the same person? As far as what I'm getting at here is, are we destined to meet each other along the way? Like, as far as...
Yeah, what's your take on destiny?
Destiny. That's a big one. So I think I could look at that from both directions, depending on the logic. Again, order and chaos is there a will or is there not? And I think that there is a destiny from a certain perspective, for sure, absolutely. Is there scenarios where I could think that may not go along those lines? Yes. So I think a lot of this is from the direction you're looking at that. I know I'm sounding confusing, but it basically depends on your way of viewing what's going on.
Jacob, did he get to the heart of your question? Jacob's gone. Okay, we're going to go to Bob in Eagle Rock, California on a wild card line. Hi, Bob.
Hey.
Good morning, or good evening.
Yeah, it's Robert. I'm in Oklahoma City. I got a comment and then a question, but I didn't know if this is following along the same lines you're talking about, but, with the economy the way it is and everything, I was at work one night driving around downtown here, and I told my coworker, I said, we really need another skyscraper on our skyline. And they're building one of the top 10 tallest skyscrapers west of the Mississippi right now. And this happened about 6 months, and I didn't read anything in a paper about it or anything like that. And now all of a sudden we're getting a skyscraper. I've been here all my life, and they haven't built one since I've been alive, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm 40 years old. And then another instance is like on the west side of town, there's this old AT&T plant that shut down when, AT&T went bust. Mm-hmm. And I said, it would be really cool if I could buy this property here and turn it into a mall. They're building a mall there now. Okay? Uh-huh. Now, what I'm wondering, is there a way to hone these skills to make it into that you can change reality to benefit your own destiny? Right? Because I have a lot of ideas that I want to do. Like I said, I would have liked to build a mall there, but it didn't happen for me. Somebody else is doing it. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But it seems like I can speak things and then they happen. It's really odd. And there's several people that witnessed it, and they're like, man, that's just really weird that you said this and now they're doing it, right?
Well, let me add to Robert's comment there for you, Dr. Lanza, is there you think there's a mechanism, the same way as that particles at great distance have some sort of an instantaneous connection, there's some way that in this particular reality we occasionally can be catching glimpses of other realities in connection sort of with ourself in some other reality, and where Robert's mall has already been built, he's getting the idea from the other Robert.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's just so much we don't understand.
Yeah.
So, I think it's a possibility. It's not something that I right now would be able to explain to you or would be able to say how that would happen. I wouldn't rule it out, though.
Tell me this. We've only got about a minute here left. I'm sure a lot of people in our listening audience right now are mad at you or they have questions. You're not out to convert or convince. I get the feeling you're more out to get us thinking in about 30 seconds. Exactly.
That's exactly what this is. It's to open people's minds, to get them to start thinking about these things and to realize that things aren't exactly the way they may have been taught to them in their school books. And so, yes. Think.
Dr. Robert Lanza, thanks very much. The book is called Biocentrism. I think it was really interesting. I appreciate you coming on the program, and we'll have you back again sometime.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right, everyone, stay with us. David Paulides is going to be here next to talk about his book, Tribal Bigfoot, and some new forensic research he's conducting. Don't go away. More to come on Coast to Coast. Thanks for being with us, everyone. We're talking with David Paulides, one of the world's foremost experts on the Bigfoot mystery and author of a book, Tribal Bigfoot, one of the very best books on this topic I have ever read. And the discussion is focused on evidence. What would it take to convince regular folks that this is real, that the Bigfoot mystery has been solved? And certainly DNA evidence would be something that would be very persuasive in that debate. And when we come back, we're going to be joined by Dr. Melba Ketchum, a scientist, specializes in DNA research and DNA analysis, and she'll tell us where things stand on the Bigfoot mystery. Stay with us on Coast to Coast. David Paulides is my guest talking about Tribal Bigfoot, his excellent book on this topic. We're joined now by Dr. Melba Ketchum. She has a doctorate in veterinary medicine, founded a company called DNA Diagnostics, which does DNA testing on human and animal forensics, and also specializes in species identification, which certainly fits the bill what we're talking about tonight. Dr. Ketchum, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
I have to wonder, are you crazy to get involved in something like this? This can't possibly help your reputation.
Oh, probably.
Have you caught any grief, even the limited amount of work that you've done on it?
I was pretty well established before this came along, so at this point it doesn't matter what other people think.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. Are you hooked on the story, on the mystery?
Somewhat. I was a total skeptic. I would say a little more than a year ago I was a total skeptic, and that has since changed.
What changed it?
Some unusual findings on some of the research we've done.
Well, tell me about it.
Well, last year, Dave's group sent in some samples, and frankly, we started getting these samples back in 1995, and we've fiddled with them all these years, and they always come out either a raccoon or a horse or something common, and I've never had any of them to turn out like I thought they might. So I decided, okay, apes run on human primers or human tests, and if these things are apes, they'll show up, and if they're human, they'll show up. So I started just screening these things for convenience sake, and one of Dave's samples showed up with a very strange peak in a location that it shouldn't have been, and it was a visual male, and it was a sex marker, and it showed up as a female with a peak where it was not supposed to be located. And I reran the thing, and it still showed an unusual band there or peak there. And so I decided that, this is not normal. And, of course, one sample is not going to help. And regrettably, I used up the DNA because, as Dave referred to earlier, these samples are the hair samples are hard to get a good yield of DNA from. And at that time, I didn't believe in it, so I just screened right through it. And this kind of changed my mind, and I was a little more curious about it at that point.
When you talk about it peaking, you mean peaking like on a chart, or what do you mean?
The electropherograms, which is a graphic representation of the DNA fragment.
David, where did you get this particular sample?
This one came out of Northern California, right on the Oregon border.
And how did you get it? I mean, you just found that somebody found it on a fence, and why would you associate it with a Bigfoot?
Well, the first one we had came out of a story in Hoopa where a woman lived on the perimeter of the reservation, and in the middle